Hello again, your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheatley, back for another episode of the History of Comic Books podcast. This time, the history of everyone's favorite friendly neighborhood, Spider-Man. Arguably one of the most popular, if not the popular superheroes from the comic book medium is Spider-Man. Since his creation in the 1960s, he has evolved past comics to become a successful toy, cartoon, and movie character, resulting in being one of the most recognizable and relatable fictional characters in history. The tale of Peter Parker's Spider-Man and his "with great power comes great responsibility" mantra continues to entrance fans new and old, a superhuman in which the human is emphasized, and it all started with Marvel and the revolution in the 1960s. The company where Spider-Man was born was Marvel. Wasn't even called that when Martin Goodman founded it. Over the years, it would go from Timely to Atlas to Marvel, taking the name from Timely's first comic publication, Marvel Comics, which was also the first appearance of the Human Torch and Namor. Much of the name changing was due to avoid paying taxes on the company. Goodman created it on January 12, 1939, entering into the pulp business, and quickly gained a reputation of being one of the biggest imitators in the business, following trends oversetting them. However, some innovations would inadvertently emerge, like the before-mentioned Marvel Comics and later Captain America Adventures by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, thanks to the talent that Goodman did hire. One such talent was Stan Lee, Goodman's nephew by marriage, who was hired on at Timely at age 17, staying there when it changed to Atlas and then Marvel. He was originally hired as Joe Simons, then Timely's editor-in-chief, to be his assistant, but soon wrote his first comic book story in Captain America Adventures number 3. After Joe Simon and Jack Kirby were fired, Goodman made Stan Lee editor-in-chief and the company's chief writer. Lee would stay with the company, riding the waves of comic trends and Goodman's mandates to follow them, from romance to westerns to war, until the backlash from the Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency led to the creation of the CMAA and the CCA, its code for regulating comic book content. The resulting backlash led to a contraction of the comic book industry in America, to the point that Goodman nearly folded Marvel before Jack Leibowitz, the co-owner of National DC, offered Goodman their own distribution network in return for keeping their line of comics to just 8 a month. As a result, Marvel was constantly canceling one book over the other to maintain the agreement, forcing Lee to adjust, along with Goodman's consummate whims to copy the industry trends over being innovative. Lee was also forced to let go of many talented artists, such as Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. When things got a little better, Stan Lee was able to hire Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko back, thanks to, in large part, to being both talented and cheap, in Lee's own words. During this time, the first glimpses of Spider-Man would start to emerge in Lee's writings. In Strange Tales number 97, a story by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko did feature an Uncle Ben and Aunt May who raised their niece only for it to turn out to be a mermaid. In an Uncanny Tales number 26, it featured a story with a character called the Spider-Man, but no relation to our wall-crawling hero, instead being about a Hungarian schoolteacher breeding gigantic creatures to take over the world. Later, in Journey into Mystery number 73 by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, the story The Spider Strikes was about a mutated spider who becomes gigantic after being exposed to radiation. All these comics were only hints of what was to come. Before Stan Lee could create such a revolutionary character like Spider-Man, though, he had to first revolutionize Marvel to do so. Lee did that with the creation of the Fantastic Four with Jack Kirby. Meant to be another copy mandated by Martin Goodman, who wanted a Marvel version of the Justice League, Lee and Kirby instead created a superhero team that was a dysfunctional family and didn't even have secret identities. However, it was this very human story that the readers loved, leading to huge sales and Goodman starting to trust Lee to do his own thing, at least partly. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby would follow up with The Incredible Hulk, which was essentially Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, into a superhero, and next he wanted to create a teen hero, Spider-Man. Stan Lee first came up with the concept, according to a later interview, when he stated he observed a spider climbing a wall in his office and imagined what a superhero would be like with those powers. He brainstormed the concept with Jack Kirby, who was game to do it until Steve Ditko pointed out how much the character resembled a fly, a superhero Kirby and Joe Simon created for Archie Comics. Going back to the drawing board, Lee removed the magic ring giving Spider-Man his powers, instead going for a radioactive spider, and changed his uncle from being a police captain. He was still working with Jack Kirby on this, but Lee soon realized that his Spider-Man wasn't working, as Kirby made him too powerful in appearance, something he was going against this time. He wanted Spider-Man to be strong, but not that strong. So Lee turned to Steve Ditko, who created the graceful Spider-Man we know today, but as a bone to Kirby, it was his cover that graced Amazing Fantasy number 15. Ditko's biggest innovation in design was the classic Spider-Man costume that covered his entire body, a rarity for a superhero. Even Batman and Captain America, you can see their jawline. The result was a look that's sometimes menacing but also welcoming to all readers, as any kid could imagine being Spider-Man. With these elements in place, all Stan Lee had to do was convince Martin Goodman to give the green light for the comic, but despite Lee's recent success, Goodman refused to do so. He objected to numerous things, such as spiders being scary and Peter Parker being a teenager though his name was Spider-Man. Lee tried to explain that that was the point, as his plan was to tell a serialized story of a young boy growing into a man, but Goodman still objected. However, when it was announced that Amazing Adult Fantasy, a Marvel anthology series that featured numerous short stories, was to be canceled with issue number 15, and that issue would be shortened to just Amazing Fantasy, Lee saw it as his shot to put the Spider-Man story into it. The comic was being canceled, so who cared what was in it, right? Spider-Man appeared in an 11-page feature along with gracing the cover by Jack Kirby on August 1962. Of note, he didn't even have the hyphen in his name yet, just Spider-Man being one word. Given the origin of Peter Parker, a young orphan and science whiz living with his Uncle Ben and Aunt May in Forest Hills, Queens. While attending a science exhibit at his school, Midtown High, Peter is bitten by a radioactive spider and gains superpowers. Peter Parker originally tries to become a wrestler, wanting to make money, only to fail to stop a robber that later kills his beloved Uncle Ben. As a result, he swears to use his powers now to fight crime, adopting the mantra, with great power comes great responsibility. Despite this being the last issue of a soon-to-be-canceled series, the story was an instant sensation, with readers clamoring for more Spider-Man stories. The comic did promise more despite its cancellation. However, he had no new series, and Amazing Fantasy was ending, so where would he go? Thankfully, Goodman saw the writing on the wall and approached Stan Lee about that Spider-Man character they both loathed so much. Amazing Spider-Man number 1 debuted in March of 1963, written by Stan Lee with pencils by Steve Ditko, with Peter Parker and his Aunt May still reeling from Uncle Ben's death and struggling for money. As a result, he breaks into the Baxter building where the Fantastic Four live, hoping to get a job, only to be rejected, go figure, while also facing off against his first supervillain, the Chameleon. This would soon become a hallmark for Spider-Man Peter Parker as he learned to adjust to being a superhero while balancing his high school and personal life, where he was picked on by the bully Flash Thompson who idolized Spider-Man. A fun irony. Steve Ditko would pencil up to 38 issues and 2 giant-sized comics, along with the Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 1 in 1964, which featured all the Marvel superheroes at the time. Most notable was the classic sequence in the story If This Be My Destiny in Amazing Spider-Man number 31 to 33, which also introduced the characters Harry Osborn and Gwen Stacy, which finds Spider-Man trapped under a pile of rubble, unable to get an antidote to his ailing Aunt May that will cure her. In the climatic moment of issue number 33, Spider-Man ushers every ounce of his strength, thinking of his friends and family, to free himself and save Aunt May. Next to his origin story is probably the most iconic story in Spidey's early history. Despite creating brilliant work together early on, Lee and Ditko would clash over the direction of the series and the character. Lee wanted Spider-Man to appear more in the comic than Peter Parker, while Ditko believed it should be 50-50 split. This did result in the classic visual of Peter Parker's face going half Spider-Man whenever his spider sense was activated. Lee also thought the origin of the Green Goblin should be tied to ancient Egypt, but Ditko also shot that down. However, Lee did hold firm on the Green Goblin's identity being tied to someone that Peter knew, ultimately revealed to be Norman Osborn, the father of Harry, one of Peter's friends, while Ditko objected, stating that it should be a random person as criminals often were. During this time, the fan letters started to appear with issue number 3, which Stan Lee answered but Ditko avoided, being a noted recluse. Ditko would leave Amazing Spider-Man in Marvel in 1966 and was replaced in the series by John Romita Sr., who was previously doing Daredevil, which Lee had Spider-Man guest star in to give him a trial run, anticipating Ditko's departure. During Romita Sr.'s art, he would introduce new villains like the Rhino, the Shocker, and the Kingpin, along with revealing that the Green Goblin was indeed Norman Osborn, Harry Osborn's father. Ditko would later claim that this was always his idea, but Romita Sr. states that he didn't think his identity would have been revealed like that if Ditko was still in the comic. Stan Lee and John Romita Sr. also debuted Mary Jane Watson in Amazing Spider number 42 in November 1966, basing her look on the movie star Anne Margaret and Go-Go Girls at the time. The character was previously mentioned in Amazing Spider-Man number 25 on June of 1965, with a running subplot being Aunt May trying to set up Peter with her neighbor's niece, Mary Jane. Peter dodges her until finally relenting, and when he opens the door at the end of issue number 42, he sees Mary Jane in all her red-headed bombshell glory, uttering her classic line, "Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot." This played to Romita Sr.'s strengths, as he was especially good at drawing women, while at the same time working for their readers, who had grown up from being young boys to teenagers, and thus now showed a larger interest in women. As a result, the other female characters like Betty Brant, Gwen Stacy, and Liz Allen also gained popularity in the series. While still writing Amazing Spider-Man and practically every other Marvel comic back at the time, Stan Lee did try to put Spider-Man in a new format with Spectacular Spider-Man #1 on July of 1968, a black and white magazine meant to appeal to older audiences, and being in a magazine form was not constrained by the CCA. The 52-page magazine featured a story by Stan Lee, John Romita Sr., and Jim Mooney titled Lo, This Monster, along with a 10-page backup feature by Lee, Larry Lieber, Stan's brother, and Bill Everett that recapped Spidey's origin. Meant for older audiences, it sported a 35-cent price tag at a time when comics were just 12 cents, and it featured an ads for cologne and aftershave and motorcycles. By issue number 2, the magazine was in full color, along with a full-page ad for issue number 3 for The Mystery of the TV Terror, though that would be the end of the magazine. However, Romita Sr. would later take the costume of the TV Terror and use it for the Prowler, another classic Spider-Man villain. Spider-Man also started to branch out in the merchandising world, along with the rest of Marvel, with trading cards that came packaged with bubblegum like baseball cards, by Don Ress. Topps also produced a Marvel Styrofoam glider to be sold at candy stores and drugstores. In 1966, Aurora produced a model kit with Ben Cooper Incorporated, and they also made Halloween costumes in 1967. Most unique of all of this was the Ideal Toy Company, who made the first Spider-Man action figure designed by Stan Weston. In fact, it was part of their Captain Action line, which allowed kids to change his figure into their favorite action hero with just a change of clothes. As a result, not only could Action dress as Spider-Man, but also the Lone Ranger, the Phantom, Captain America, Superman, and even Batman, making for one of the earliest examples of a company crossover. In addition, the Amazing Spider-Man Collector's Album also started to appear in bookstores by Lancer Books, released by Souvenir Press of London in 1966. To accommodate the smaller pages, the comic art was reformatted so the panels weren't shrunk. However, due to Marvel's limited distribution, it was still stuck with 8 comic books a month mandate. The characters were not as popular as DC or other franchises, thus not able to attract bigger licenses yet. Thus, on September 1964, Marvel decided to do it for themselves with the Merry Marvel Marching Society, with fans being able to pay a $1 membership and in return got a card and an LP of the creators saying hi. The reclusive Ditko is represented by the sound of a window opening and someone jumping out. On August of 1965, the Merry Marvel bullpen page was also added to the comics, and shirts, posters, and pins were offered to members. In addition, Marvel promoted that if 6 fans joined together at the same time, they could form their own local chapter, along with a special club certificate. However, a new venue would soon open up for Spider-Man and the rest of Marvel that would finally turn them into a multimedia sensation. Spider-Man would join the rest of Marvel embracing out the cartoons with Marvel Superheroes Show, which was announced in Amazing Spider-Man number 42 in November of 1966. It was produced by Grant Trey Lawrence Animation, a Canadian animation studio founded by Grant Simmons, Ray Patterson, and Robert Lawrence in 1954. The show would feature Captain America, Thor, Iron Man, Submariner, and the Hulk, using art from the comic books, resulting in stiff animation, if not just still images from moving across the screen. On the upside, it was the art of John Romita Sr., Don Heck, Jack Kirby, and numerous other great Marvel illustrators. Spider-Man would soon have his own cartoon with Spider-Man, which debuted on September 9, 1967, and lasted to June 14, 1970, lasting for 52 episodes. It was paired with Hanna-Barbera's, the studio known for the Flintstones and Space Ghost, Fantastic Four cartoon, which aired at 9:30 a.m. on Saturday mornings, with Spider-Man, still produced by Grant Trey Lawrence, following at 10. Only the first 2 seasons appeared on ABC, with the third being syndicated. The animations were stiff, and fans couldn't help but ask, what was he webbing when he swung across the city, leading to the classic running joke in the Spider-Man fandom. The series did incorporate many of his villains, from Dr. Octopus, who appeared in the very first episode, to the Green Goblin, while the Season 2 premiere, The Origin of Spider-Man, was a faithful adaptation of the origin story from Amazing Fantasy number 15. Ralph Bakshi was the executive producer, serving as also writer and director at times, and would later go on to create the more adult animation classics like Fritz the Cats and Wizards. The most memorable thing about the cartoon, though, was the catchy theme song by Paul Francis Webster, which was composed by Bob Harris III, Stan Phillips,